welcome to this online briefing for one of Natural Hazards Research Australia's projects. My name is Brendan McAtee. I'm one of the Node Research Managers at NHRA. I work in WA and South Australia. Today we're giving a bit more background information for one of our projects. T8A8 is our code name, and the project is about quantifying and predicting bushfire risk following large-scale drought-induced vegetation die-off. So we'll be working through a description of that during this presentation with a couple of the experts from Department of Biodiversity and Conservation and Attractions in Western Australia, who are the proponents of this project. Just to note that we'll be recording this presentation and it will be available after the presentation up on our YouTube channel. As part of Natural Hazards Research Australia, I'd like to acknowledge the First Nations owners of the land where we respectively live and work. As I mentioned, I'm over in Perth, Western Australia, so the Whadjuk part of the Noongar Nation, just south of Perth around Belia. So I'd like to pay my respects to elders past and present for the Noongar folks and other traditional owners around the country. And I always think it's good to acknowledge when we work, particularly when we're working in this fire space, that the work that we're doing here builds on that traditional knowledge around how to live with, manage and use fire in the landscape. It's always something for us to think about. So this is what we'll talk about today. The role of this online briefing is to provide some more background information about the project, a little bit about where it comes from, talking about the objectives, get a bit more detail around that. We'll work through just a verbal description of, you'll see the same questions that will be asked in the tender document, the expression of interest document that you can fill out for this project. So they're the important pieces out of these projects, as well as an opportunity to ask any questions that you might have, whether they might be technical in nature or about the process as well. So I mentioned myself, so I'm Brendan McAtee. I am the Node Research Manager for Natural Hazards Research Australia in WA, South Australia. Behind the scenes, you just heard from my colleague Lara Wedding, who's one of our Research Services Project Officers who'll be working with this project. So thank you for your help, Lara. And from Department of Biodiversity, Conservation and Attractions, Dr. Katinka Ruthroff. She'll be talking a bit more about the science side of the project and the drivers from the DBCA perspective. So first, a bit about Natural Hazards Research Australia. So the centre commenced operation in July 2021, so we're just moving into our fourth year. Kicked off with $85 million of funding over 10 years from the Commonwealth, and plus our partner contributions. So a bit about the structure of Natural Hazards Research Australia, similar to a CRC, but with a bigger focus on partner contributions and partner challenges and knowledge gaps. So we work with those partners to articulate those challenges and turn those into the kind of research questions and projects that we're talking through today. The core objectives of the centre, so it's around protecting human life, minimising harm and suffering, contributing to the development and support of well-prepared and resilient communities, and we invest in research that translates into action. So all of that centre is very much focused on those elements of understanding and responding and dealing with natural hazards. That's a little bit about the centre. We'll talk a little bit now about the project itself. So for this, I'm going to throw over to Katinka, because she is very deeply immersed in this work, and we'll let you know more about the project. So I'll throw over to you, Tink.
Great, thanks, Brendan, and thanks, Lara, as well, for organising. And welcome, everybody. Thank you so much for coming online and listening to our woes and the opportunity to really contribute to some of the research that really needs to happen rapidly across, especially Southern Australia. So as you probably have heard, Southwest or Western Australia had one of its longest and hottest, driest periods on record in 23-24. The summer really didn't finish until May 24, which was pretty extraordinary. And a small team of us, including my colleague Ricky Van Dongen, who's also in the group at the moment, have been mapping the response of vegetation communities across the southwest. So what we rapidly noticed is that many vegetation communities across the southwest responded to this extreme event. And we've been trying to map it through spatial science as well as on-ground works, trying to quantify which veg communities and how much was actually affected. So we're thinking it was over 1,000 kilometres of the southwest, from Shark Bay down to probably Albany, and coastal communities, woodland, forest, heath. It was quite stark. So there are clear gaps in knowledge with regards to how these communities are responding, but also how they will recover. What we really need to get a handle on is what die-off in different vegetation communities means for fuel characteristics, as well as what that means for fire or the potential fire behaviour. So we'd really like to develop some clear questions and outputs around those knowledge gaps. So that's, but not only in native communities, we obviously have other vegetation communities such as pine and revegetation that has responded to the die-off. And so we need to get a handle on those as well, what that means for fuel characteristics and fire behaviour. So we've created this project around those questions. Here's an example of some of the vegetation die-off. That is not autumn colours. We don't have those sorts of autumn colours in this area. This is a coastal area near Margaret River. So a lot of the coastal area between the capes in the southwest looked like this. And so it's a very diffuse response. So some species were okay, other species suffered severe die-off. And so being able to get a handle on what that means for not only those vegetation communities, but what that means for fire behaviour. We had some pretty stark responses from our pine estate across the southwest. This is north of Perth, and you can see there are patterns in there, and then some of it's diffuse. So what does that mean for mortality, but what does that mean for fire risk as well in those communities? So we do have quite a few collaborative partners for this project. So we're keen to work together with them to understand what their needs are, what their questions are, but also develop some really useful information for them.
So I guess what we can see on the screen there is in the bottom corner, we have what we call drought mapping, I guess, which is really just sort of the change in NDVI over a small period of time. And so like Katinka was saying, she went out in the field and collected a lot of field data and observations. So then we use those sort of drought and non-drought affected observations to try and optimize what pair of Landsat and Sentinel dates we could use to pull out the drought effect, because sometimes you'd go somewhere and it's died off, but you don't really know the start and end dates of that sort of event. So we had a model running across the southwest using both Landsat and Sentinel, because we needed to mosaic them all to get full coverage. And we sort of optimized that model. It's a pretty simple model, but trying to optimize those dates, I guess, across that area to sort of maximize that drought impact, and then work through those thresholds and what do we consider low, what do we consider medium, and what do we consider high. So there is an example there in the Perth Hills, and we can see those classes. They were checked in the field by Katinka, and then that model was applied sort of right through the southwest. And as we go further north, it gets harder and harder to sort of pick up that change, because you don't get a big drop in NDVI or drop in the indices, because everything's quite dry to start with. But yeah, that's a process we put together. And there's a lot of field data and a lot of imagery to try and cover the whole southwest, I guess.
So thank you for that description. You get a bit of an understanding of the scale of the events that we're talking about, the different landscapes, vegetation types that we've seen that die off in, and collectively, this project is really about understanding that die-off and understanding what does that mean for the bushfire risk and severity, as was mentioned. So key elements of this project: understand impacts of heat wave, drought on bushfire disaster risk, Quantifying those fuel characteristics for a range of vegetation types. We've seen some examples of what those vegetation types look like and the difference in different locations. Working towards calculating potential fire behaviour is an important part of this project. And then in the forward-looking element, identifying those interactions between climate change and bushfire risk using the kind of remote sensing that Ricky was talking about, and heat wave, drought die-off research sites, of which there's a collection. So the expected outputs that we saw there, they're the key science outputs, if you like. Core outputs from this project, we're now talking more about the administrative side of NHRA's projects. A project plan co-designed with the project working group, very much in favour of those co-design processes and working closely together to set up the project and throughout the project to the results. A report that describes implications of vegetation die-off in terms of fuel characteristics, how potential fire behaviour may change with vegetation die-off, and the development of remote sensing tools through that process to predict how future climate change will influence die-off recovery and changes in bushfire risk. So it's really understanding those vegetation types in those areas that we've seen examples of, understanding how that die-off influences fire behaviour and what might that look like under future scenarios. Other outputs that we work to are more the presentation side and communication of the research outputs as well. So stakeholder presentations, peer-reviewed academic publications, if that's possible in the time frame. Then more related to the administrative side, so quarterly progress reports, project report we just mentioned. And we also, one of the really, I think, good pieces of elements of Natural Hazard Research Australia is its investment in communications of research outcomes and all the work that the centre does around natural hazards. And so working with those communications team around those kind of outputs, which may be presentations. We run hazard notes, which are communications on research findings and practice out to communities. And our innovation mandate as well, we're always interested in how we can communicate and deliver the research outcomes. So to summarise what we're talking about, so we've talked about some of the outputs. Where does this research take us? The capability to quantify the change in bushfire risk and know where and when to mitigate that risk. And the knowledge to understand how heat waves, drought events, and fire interact, and how that influences vegetation recovery and change in the future. So there's very much a risk element to this based on today's information, but how can we then use that looking forward into the future as well, to start to give us those ideas of what things might look like. This is just a summary. Collaboration is part of NHRA's DNA, and so we like to enable those collaborative approaches and researchers working together with practitioners as much as we can. And you see some examples and description of what that might look like through these projects. So for this project, there's a budget envelope there. You can see between $250,000 and $300,000 for over a time frame of 1.5 years to work through the elements that we've talked about in this process and this presentation so far, and a summary of governance and reporting requirements through NHRA. We keep it fairly lean, but our real important part of working through the centre is making sure that we get a good project up and going, and then at the end the impacts are utilised, and we're at the end of the day, the investment from the Commonwealth into the centre is to create that impact and those positive outcomes in natural hazards response management, all those areas. And so you can see there the key parts of our governance and reporting projects or programs. So we usually work with one lead provider from a research institution. The contract that we enter into is with the institution of the lead researcher. We run a project management committee, which is a small group that's close to the project to keep it on track and answer any questions, and they come from the research team and our participant agencies. If needed, we can form a larger steering committee for those bigger projects where we need to make sure we're engaged with the wider community. Regular meetings a project management committee, depending on the length of the project, is generally quarterly, but we organise project update meetings as required. In terms of the reporting, so we'll end up with the project plan, and we will very collaborative to start off the project with around developing milestone schedule, then the quarterly progress reports, evaluation report at the end, and stakeholder presentations, and really moving into communication of those research outcomes as we get towards the end of the project. So this is the EOI process, expression of interest process that we're in at the moment. You've probably already been to that link on NHRA's website, but you can find more detail about the project there and the forms for providing a proposal to NHRA. Our centre contacts for this are the research services team. You've met Lara already, so her and her colleagues answer those emails, and so research@naturalhazards.com.au is where if you have any questions, please ask them through that channel, and they will go onto our FAQ page for the project as well, so that everybody has an equal access to the information about the project. Submission of the EOI for this project must be prepared using the Centre's EOI submission form, which you'll find at that link to the project at the top there. All EOI should be submitted to research@naturalhazards.com.au by 5 p.m. We're working in Australian Eastern Daylight Time on Wednesday, the 2nd of April. It's the timeline for to receive responses to this expression of interest. So there's a summary of what you'll see in that EOI submission form that asks questions about your proposal that you'll be familiar with if you've done research proposals before. We try to find that balance of it being descriptive, but also fairly easy to respond to. So you'll find each of those sections in that EOI submission with appropriate guidance in there as well. And if you have any questions when you're putting together your proposal, please ask them through that research@naturalhazards.com.au email address. So all this information you'll find in that EOI submission form. You'll see this evaluation criteria within that submission form as well. What this sets out is the key areas that when we're assessing applications for this project work, that we look at these different evaluation criteria. You can see they're weighting up there. Of particular importance for this one is really demonstrating that approach that will give the results that we've described. And so when we go through our assessment of applications received, we'll look at each of those criteria and evaluate all the proposals on that basis. So if we look at the timeline for EOI submissions to this project, so the call for expressions of interest opened on the 5th of March. We're on the online briefing at the moment on the 18th of March. Due date for EOIs, the 2nd of April. We'll have that assessment process completed and notify applicants of outcomes 2nd of June. And then we'll work with the successful applicant to co-develop that project proposal, which will get signed off and start the research project for real. So thank you. I hope you found some detail in this presentation that's been of interest. Get some more detail of the project. There's the link to go to the project again. So now we have the opportunity to ask any questions that you might have either about the process itself or some of the technical detail. I'm going to stop sharing now, and I'll ask Lara if there's any questions that have been asked in the chat already.
Yeah, we haven't had anything in the chat so far.
Okay, thank you. I'll put it out to the group then. Are there any questions that we can help you with?
Hi, can you hear me?
Yep. That's Nicholas. Yep.
Yes, g'day. Nicholas from ANU. One of the things you outlined, can't remember where you had it listed as sort of a research question or something, was around the impact of drought and dieback on fuel characteristics, I think it was. I can't remember the exact wording. By that, do you mean sort of structural characteristics or fuel moisture characteristics, or is that like a little bit more open?
Thanks, Nicholas. What I mean by characteristics is, yes, exactly what you were saying. Fuel moisture, coarse woody debris, fine woody debris, the structure of that, and how that compares to areas that haven't experienced die-off. So how has that vegetation community changed with die-off? So basic coarse woody debris transects and that structure, how has that changed live and dead fuels?
I'm just wondering, so myself and I'm sure many other people here are based in Eastern Australia. Are you imagining that as part of this project, the research team would need to be measuring that sort of information, or is there potential for some sort of collaboration with your team to collect some of that data?
Yeah, good question. I wouldn't be opposed to a collaborative project. We'll have to talk through that because, yeah, that sort of information will be vital for the rest of the project. So I'm happy to discuss collaborative groups, teams in the East as well as the West. So
great, thank you.
Cool.
Thanks everyone for the talk. I'm Jatin Kala from Murdoch Uni. As I've indicated in the chat, my area is regional climate modeling. So we have a project co-funded with DUA here in WA that's looking at these types of questions. You know, how will drought change? How will drought and heat waves change? So it's quite relevant. With the third aim, so you want remote sensing tools to help better understand how future risks change. But I guess I just want to understand what is meant by remote sensing tools in this context, because to me, remote sensing is about using satellite data or similar to understand what's happened in the past and what's happening in near real time. Whereas when in the future, we're using regional climate model data. So I would like some clarity as to what is meant by this remote sensing tool to better predict the future. Because by definition, you can't quite use remote sensing. Remote sensing is about monitoring what's happening right now rather than making long-term predictions. So yeah, could someone comment on that?
I think it's probably a modelling exercise in that you would look at the drought-impacted areas, fires that have occurred, and then predict that forward, I guess. So the remote sensing would be used to look at the drought areas, fire impacts that are happening now, and then that would be used to, I guess, predict forward about if in other have the same kind of drought conditions, how does that predict forward from there? Does that make sense?
Yeah. So you're not expecting the delivery of a piece of software as a remote sensing tool. You're expecting.
I don't think so. It's more a model. Yeah.
Okay, that makes sense now.
Examine those relationships, I guess. And there has been a couple of the wildfires recently have hit areas that were drought affected, and we haven't really looked at them yet, but they would be interesting to look at.
So it's probably more remote sensing driven tools.
Yeah, driven tools.
Remote sensing tools itself.
Right. Okay.
Thanks, Ricky.
There, I think.
Other questions?
Yep.
Yeah, I've got a quick one as well, if that's okay. With that third project
Jane,
description about, can you hear me okay?
Yeah, we can, Jane. Thank you.
Okay, great. With that third question about the remote sensing, it mentions something around, and you sort of alluded to these research sites that might already be existing. Is there a reference or something we can look at to find out more about those sites, if they exist?
I can send some papers.
Okay, thank you.
Cool.
Yep. So for that one, if you've got some papers, Tink, send it to us and we'll distribute it out via the
Oh, great. Thanks, Brendan.
the research bit to people who have registered for this.
Yeah.
So we make sure that everybody has got the same information to make use of.
Yeah.
Thank you for the question, Jane. Now, see, there was another question?
Paul
Here we are.
DeMar
Hi, Paul.
from GHD. Thanks for taking a question. Look, we had a similar situation on the East Coast in 2019 and 20 when we had some pretty extraordinary fires over here where there were whole forested hillsides that were what we call drought scorched. They looked like they'd been burnt. The leaves, we're talking mature eucalypt canopies here that were completely browned off. And I have an operational background. I used to be the fire chief at Forestry Corp over in New South Wales. And what would interest me if we were able to leverage, I don't know whether you have data, but have you already collected fuels data from the areas that have been mapped as being intensively drought affected at all that we could utilise then to tie in with remote sensing and do predictive modelling?
Good question. For this particular event, no, we haven't. For a previous event, we have, but it was quite limited in the scope of that study. And I'll send that paper through to Brendan as well.
I think I got enough of that answer to understand. Thank you.
Yeah, so we'll all this information we're talking about we'll get from the DBCA team and provide it out to everyone who's been registered on this call and via our website as well.
This is more of a process question to you folks who've done these EOIs a number of times. So I presume what happens a lot of the time is you get people submitting and then there's some sort of sorting process that happens, not just in terms of evaluation, but also like maybe EOIs get combined and such. Can you speak to what that looks like or how that works, or what in your experience in past processes, how that sort of works out? And particularly, I guess I'm thinking about, this event happened in WA and it clearly needs something to happen in WA, but we're probably talking about this because it's a thing that matters across the whole of Southern Australia. And so, if one was to make a consortium or something, how's that work?
So thanks for the question, Joe. I think there's a couple of parts to that. One is those consortium can be all part of the the bid or the proposal that goes in. There's certainly no problem with that. And on a few occasions, we have gone the other way where the most value for the project would be gained by putting a couple of proposals together. And that really goes through in the first phase, at least, through our assessment panel through NHRA to make those decisions. And then it's also then our role is to build that kind of collaboration. We think that's the best way to go.
These things have to be necessarily vague. So yeah, that makes sense. But the devil's in the details down the track, of course.
So I guess in terms of our decisions to combine proposals, I would say yes, it's happened before, not frequently, but I think that's a discussion that goes on with ourselves in NHRA and the proponents as well, if you'd like.
Yeah, thanks. One other quick question about communications. So once you get research up and going, to what degree is it expectation that a lot of the investment in the communications is contained in the budget of the project itself versus receives support in staffing and funding from NHRA as an organization? So, where's the bulk of the expectation sitting there?
Probably funding from within the project, and or completion of those communication elements, and leveraging off the resources that our communications team have. That's certainly for the engaging part. If you're thinking about writing papers and so forth, we don't have any. I mean, as a rule, we don't have any extra funding, for the effort to go into the paper kind of production if it's outside the time of the project.
No, I'm thinking about when you do comms work, you need time, and you need to do a lot of legwork, getting notes together and reaching out to people and trying to pitch to different media and do social media work and all that. And that's what I'm asking is like, is there much support from the NHRA side, or
Absolutely.
Is that okay?
Yeah, when I mentioned the investment in our comms, yeah, we have a really strong social media team, and to work collaboratively with the research team to really kind of get that out to the right places, involved in the right media streams and things like that. Yeah, as my own personal anecdote, that's one of the things I really appreciated about NHRA is that investment in the comms. So I think that legwork that you're talking about is something that we can certainly take on.
Great, thanks.
Any more questions? I think we're clear of questions. So I would just like to thank everybody for being involved in the online briefing today. I hope you found it worthwhile, help with your thinking and proposals, thinking about the project and proposals of what needs to be done. So thank you for being in touch. You'll find that on the NHR website, you find those details about the project and the EOI submission form. And if you have any questions, please email research@naturalhazards.com.au. So that would be good. We'll answer all those questions. As I mentioned, the information that Katinka and Ricky have, we'll collect that and distribute it out to the people who've been registered on this briefing, and also make it available via our website so that everybody can be working from the same base. But thank you very much. We will call that to a close there, and look forward to seeing your submissions come in, and watch out for future projects that are coming through in HRA. So thank you very much for your time today.